part 4 of our analysis of Macbeth's character. And I'm going to just talk about how he ends the play now. So we know by the end of Act 4, the forces of, I suppose, justice and decency and virtue are uniting against him. And that's that famous scene in Act 4, Scene 3, when Malcolm, the rightful heir, the Prince of Cumberland, meets with Macduff, who is never been tainted by association with Macbeth, has always suspected Macbeth of involvement in the murder of the king. That scene, it's long. If you're studying, if you're preparing for the imperial theme question, the kingship in the play, something that is very important. And again, I'll do that at a later date with you in class. But just the language used to describe Macbeth's character in this scene is really important. So Malcolm begins the scene by describing Macbeth as a tyrant whose sole name blisters our tongue. So he's a disease. The blistering of the tongue is a very visceral reference to the plague, this terrible disease with 80% mortality rate that swept through Europe periodically for 400 years. So, you want to get rid of the plague. Macbeth is the plague. He's somebody who has enslaved the people of Scotland. He says, I think our country sinks beneath the yoke. It weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wounds. The yoke is an instrument of slavery. It's a physical restraint designed to disempower people. So Macbeth is disempowered the people of Scotland. He is subjugating them to his will, and he's doing it through violence. And the personification of Scotland as a body which is being, tortured, weeping and bleeding, and having cuts and gashes added to the wounds every day. It's quite extraordinary and very powerful image. Macduff confirms for us that Macbeth's reign as king is a period of incredible suffering, when he says Scotland is a place where new widows howl, new orphans cry, new sorrows strike heaven in the face on a daily basis. Again, look at the language, new, repetition. The image of God being slapped in the face is indicative of the fact that Macbeth's very existence is insulting to God. And the idea of orphans being made and widows being made, all indicative of Macbeth's cruelty. And of course, Macduff also says that not in all the legions of horrid hell can come a devil more damned than evils to... Sorry, it should be to top Macbeth. There's a mistake there. I'm going to fix that now, I think, if I can. Maybe I can't. Computer not letting me do it. There we go. To top Macbeth means, more than Macbeth. So, he is, the worst of the worst. Okay? So the time has to come then in the play, the denouement of the play, the final act of the play, to get rid of him. And again, it's something that you need to be aware of. How does the play end, and does the play end satisfactorily? Well, Macbeth's story at the end of the play is incredible. It's incredible. What does he do at the end of the play? He clings to the witches' prophecies, even though it's clear to everybody that the witches are, manipulating him and lying to him. He continues to propagate violence. He continues to kill completely unnecessarily as he strives for self-preservation. When he hears Lady Macbeth is dead, he shrugs his shoulders. She should have died hereafter. Who cares? On stage, for the first time in the play, he kills somebody in front of us. And that's young Seward, the son of an English general. And we know young Seward is a child because he's described in the play as an unrough youth, which means that he's not old enough yet to grow a beard, so he's only a child. Macbeth, the child killer, tried to kill sorry, no, 1 second. There we go. Tried to kill Fleance, killed Macduff's children. Now here he is killing another child, so he is beyond any forgiveness. And then he gives us this incredible tomorrow soliloquy, which is one of the most amazing pieces of writing I've ever read. It's probably my favourite thing Shakespeare ever wrote. But, essentially it's self-pitying. And there's no moment of catharsis. There's no moment where he goes, I'm sorry. Never. Othello says I'm sorry. King Lear says I'm sorry. Hamlet says I'm sorry. Macbeth never says I'm sorry. So when he's killed at the end of the play, we don't exactly mourn for him. There is tragedy, but we'll talk about that in a second. Some good quotes to prepare for that section. To burn and wood, remove the dunce and ain, I cannot taint with fear is a great one because it shows him relying on the witches, and that's pathetic. He's their dupe, their victim, the victim of their deceits. But of course, the witches' powers to deceive only go as far as his willingness to be deceived. The reason he believes them is not because they put a magic spell on him, it's because he wants to believe them. That's their strength, is their knowledge that that's what he wants. This one here is fantastic. I definitely learn it. Scur the country round, hang those that talk of fear. I mean, why does Shakespeare have him say that? Because Shakespeare wants us to understand this is a monster. He's butchering his own people. He's telling his soldiers to scour, to clean the country with blood. Skear means scour. She should have died hereafter. What an incredible moment in the play. This woman who was his dearest partner, and she's driven to suicide because of the consequences of her involvement with him in the regicide, and her inability to cope with the guilt of that, and he doesn't care when she dies. And then you have this famous speech. Out, brief candle, that's a metaphor for life. Life is short, can be extinguished easily. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. The imagery is beautiful. The imagery is extraordinary. It's rhythm, the use of trochees and iambs and the mixing up of those in it to create this kind of very striking language is brilliant. But for me, it's that phrase there that really just, condemns him, because life is significant. Life is not meaningless. Life has value. He just threw it all away in pursuit of his ambition. Life is about love, friendship, loyalty, duty, all of those principles that are supposed to guide us and bind us. And he just threw all of them away in search of this golden round. So it's easy for him to say at the end, sure, who cares if we die? Life is meaningless. Life has meaning. And his rejection of the meaning of life is another aspect, this nihilistic quality in him. Nihilism, the idea that nothing, it's a very juvenile feckin' philosophy. Nothing is of any meaning, and therefore, life is of no meaning. It's nonsense. Life has meaning. Macbeth has lost sight of that because of the power and the drive of his ambition and what that led him to do. We have to remember, you can't just say, he's a bad guy. He's a tragic hero. He's a guy who had so much and lost so much, all because of his own flaw. And that's what it means. And so therefore you have to have some element, there has to be some element of sympathy at the end of the play. Despite the monster that he is, that's what Shakespeare does. He challenges us to see humanity even in the monster. And I think there's a couple of moments when he's confronted by Macduff at the end, just before then and then during that confrontation, when he says these lines, I'll fight till from my bones the flesh be hacked. The alliteration in that line and the use of the onomatopoeic hacked, again, power of Shakespeare's language is evident there, and violence of those words. And then the mind I sway by and the heart I bear shall never sag with doubt nor shake with fear. And then he lay on Macduff, and damned be he who first cries hold enough. And there he is saying, I'll never surrender. And he goes and fights. And there we're reminded of his heroic qualities at the beginning of the play. He was fearless as a warrior when he fought MacDonald's rebels and Sweno's Viking invaders. And he was heroic. And it's just a reminder, the tragedy is that, not that he's going to die, and we don't feel sorry that he's going to die. In fact, it's a relief when he does die. But it's that he destroyed himself, and he didn't have to. He came under the influence of the witches. Yes, they play their role. There is evil in the world. If we give in to evil in the world, then that leads one way. But we don't have to give in to it. That's the message of this play. He chose to give in to it. The power of his ambition came under the influence of the witches. His toxic relationship with his wife, again, fed into this. But ultimately, he had free will, and he chose to do this terrible, terrible thing. And after he did it, instead of holding his hands up and saying, I'm sorry, he just kept killing in order to try and preserve his life, desperately avoiding a fate he knows he can't avoid. And therefore there can be no redemption for him. You know, we have to have that sense of, it's a difficult balancing act. Again, I use that word paradox, confusion, the chaos and confusion question that was asked a couple of years ago was a great question, because there is this confusion, you know, in Macbeth, because he's a human being. There's no human being you can put into a box and say hero or villain. Even the worst of us have some sort of redeeming qualities, but that doesn't mean that we find redemption for them. It doesn't mean that we feel that we're sorry for them, but we must recognize in them something of ourselves, and that's the key, I suppose, at the end, if I'm not waffling. So look, if you want to sum up Macbeth at the end of the play, ultimately he puts his own interests and desires above the welfare of others, and when he does that, he shows no regrets, and the only regret he shows is for himself. So when he's killed by Macduff, there's a sense of relief, as there should be. The order has been restored, that evil has been defeated, and that the people of Scotland will once again be able to return to a time when the natural order is in place, and there's stability, and there's positivity, the potential for good in the kingdom. So hopefully that's in some way useful.